My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 30 years old, and before I tell you why I ended my wedding within 24 hours, you need to understand one thing first. I am alive because my sister chose fire over herself. When I was 9 years old, our house caught fire at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. It was an old house with old wiring, the kind people shrug off for years because nothing bad has happened yet. Until one night, it does. My older sister Abigail was 12. Her bedroom was closer to the stairs, closer to the front door, closer to safety. She could have gotten out. She could have run downstairs and into the yard, and no one on earth would have blamed her. She was a child. Instead, she came back for me. I still remember pieces of it in flashes, the way trauma stores itself in strange corners. The smell first, then heat, then Abigail's voice, shouting my name in a way I had never heard before, not annoyed, not playful, terrified. By the time she got to my room, the hallway ceiling was already starting to give. She dragged me out of bed so fast I didn't even understand what was happening. I remember coughing. I remember her hand wrapped around my wrist so tightly it hurt. I remember the orange light moving across the walls like something alive. And I remember this most clearly. She put her body between mine and the falling fire. A section of the burning ceiling came down across her back and shoulder as we ran through the hallway. Even now, when I think about it too hard, something in my chest still locks up. She was 12 years old. 12. And she kept moving. She got me down the stairs. She pushed me toward the front door. The neighbors had already called 911. Paramedics were there within minutes. And I had minor smoke inhalation and a small burn on my arm. Abigail had second and third degree burns across her upper back, part of her right shoulder, and down one arm. She spent 3 weeks in a burn unit. Over the next 2 years, she went through 4 skin graft surgeries. The scars never went away. They stretched pale and textured across her skin, visible every summer in tank tops and open-back swimsuits, and every ordinary family barbecue where she refuses to hide who she is to make other people comfortable. She has never treated those scars like a tragedy performance. They are simply part of her, part of the price she paid for loving me more than she feared pain. So when I say she was going to be standing beside me at my wedding, I need you to understand there was never another option. Abigail wasn't just my maid of honor because she's my sister. She was my maid of honor because every birthday I've ever had, every job I've ever worked, every apartment I've lived in, every person I've ever loved, every version of my life after age 9 exists because she ran into smoke and brought me out. That matters. My fiancé, Daniel, and I had been together for 3 years. We'd been engaged for 8 months, and the wedding was 6 weeks away. June wedding. Big enough to be expensive, small enough that everybody kept calling it intimate, even though 180 guests does not feel intimate when you're paying for chairs, food, flowers, and someone to photograph all of it. Everything was booked. Venue reserved. Caterer confirmed. DJ hired. Photographer paid. Flowers ordered. My dress bought. Daniel's suit tailored. Invitations mailed. The whole machine was already moving. And Abigail, obviously, was my maid of honor. When I asked her, she cried. My sister is one of those women who looks unshakable from a distance. She's 6 feet tall, works in construction management, lifts things most men pretend are heavier than they are, and has this calm, grounded way of speaking that makes everybody else sound slightly underprepared. But when I handed her the little box with the maid of honor bracelet inside, she covered her mouth and cried right there in my kitchen. It's one of my favorite memories. Daniel had never had a problem with her, at least not one I could see. He came to family holidays. He stood next to her at cookouts. He joked with her over beer and grilled chicken and football scores. He had seen her scars dozens of times, probably more. She never hid them, and nobody in my family ever treated them like something to politely ignore. They were part of her body, part of our story, part of the truth. 3 weeks ago, we had our final meeting with the wedding photographer. He was professional, easygoing, one of those people who manages to make logistics sound artistic. He walked us through the timeline, the formal portraits, the first look setup, the wedding party arrangements, the family combinations, the reception candids, standard stuff. He mentioned that the maid of honor and best man would be in a lot of the major photos, ceremony angles, reception entrance, toasts, formal portraits, candid shots. I noticed Daniel get quieter after that, but I didn't think much of it at the time. That night, we went to dinner, and he barely touched his food. I asked if something was wrong. He stared at his plate for a second, then said, I need to talk to you about something sensitive. There are sentences that split your life before and after, and sometimes they arrive in the softest voice imaginable. I said, okay, what's up? He took a breath. I think we need to replace your maid of honor. I laughed. Actually laughed. I thought he was kidding. Replace her with who? A mannequin? He didn't smile. I'm serious, Claire. The room went still in that weird way. Ordinary rooms do when something ugly enters them. The clink of silverware from another table. Somebody laughing too loudly near the bar. A server passing behind me with drinks balanced on a tray. Everything outside our booth stayed normal, which somehow made it worse. I said, why would I replace Abigail? He shifted in his seat. I've been thinking about it since the photographer meeting. A cold feeling started moving through me. Thinking about what? He lowered his voice, like quietness could make cruelty sophisticated. She's going to be in almost every important photo, and I just think it's going to be distracting. I blinked at him. Distracting how? He hesitated, then said, look, I know this sounds bad. That is almost never followed by anything redeemable. She's very striking, he said. She's tall, she has that strong presence, and with the scars, people's eyes are going to go to her. For a second, I genuinely didn't understand the sentence I had just heard. I stared at him and felt my mind trying to correct it into something human. He kept going. I'm not saying she can't come. Obviously, she should come. I just don't think she needs to be front and center in every photo. Something in me went silent. Not shattered, not exploded. Silent. I put my fork down carefully and said, are you asking me to remove my sister as maid of honor because the scars she got saving my life might ruin your wedding aesthetic? His jaw tightened. That's not what I said. It is exactly what you said. No, Claire, you're twisting it. I'm talking about composition, balance, the overall look. The overall look, I repeated. He exhaled hard, like I was the difficult one. She's going to pull focus. I think that was the moment the relationship actually died. Not later, not after the shouting, not after the cancellations. Right there, in that booth, while a candle burned between us, and the man I was supposed to marry looked at my sister's burned skin and saw a photography problem. I said very quietly, she was 12 years old when she ran through a burning hallway to save me. He rubbed his forehead. I know that. No, I said, you know the story. That is not the same thing. He leaned back and crossed his arms. You're making this emotional. I laughed once, but there was nothing warm in it. Emotional. I'm trying to think practically. Practically? Yes, this is our wedding, our photos, our memories. I looked at him for a long moment and saw, with horrifying clarity, that he had probably rehearsed this. He had probably sat with the thought, polished it, softened the ugliest parts, convinced himself it was reasonable. Then he said the thing that finished it. She's also, objectively, she stands out more than you do. I felt the blood drain from my face. He rushed forward, sensing too late how far he had gone. I don't mean that as an insult. You just said my sister is too noticeable to stand next to me at my own wedding. That's not... And that her scars are distracting. I'm saying people will look at her. Because she's beautiful? I asked. He went silent. Because that was part of it too. Abigail is beautiful. Not despite what she survived. Not in some inspirational poster way. Just beautiful. Strong, direct, unforgettable. And Daniel, my fiancé, the man who claimed he loved me, had somehow turned that into a grievance. Then came the solution he had apparently already prepared. We could ask your cousin Melissa to step in, he said. She has a softer energy. The photos would feel more cohesive. I just looked at him. Melissa, a cousin I saw maybe twice a year. Pleasant, irrelevant Melissa. He had come to dinner with a replacement plan for my sister. I let the silence sit there until he finally looked uncomfortable. Then I said, Abigail stands next to me at my wedding, or there is no wedding. His face changed. Claire, don't do that. Pick one. You're overreacting. No, I'm reacting exactly enough. He leaned closer. This is about aesthetics, not feelings. I stood up so suddenly the chair legs scraped the floor. My sister carries scars on her body because she chose me over her own safety, I said. If you can look at that and call it aesthetics, then I have nothing else to say to you tonight. I walked out before dessert, before the bill, before he could catch up to me in the parking lot. He came home an hour later. We didn't scream. Somehow that would have felt easier. We just stood in the kitchen under the yellow overhead light and stared at each other like strangers who had accidentally ended up with each other's keys. He said I was being dramatic. I said he was being vile. He said he wasn't trying to exclude Abigail, just adjust roles. I said demoting my sister to make the photos prettier was exclusion with better branding. He slept in the bedroom. I slept on the couch because I couldn't stand the idea of lying beside him. I remember staring at the ceiling in the dark and thinking something I didn't want to think. I do not know this man. And once that thought arrived, it refused to leave. The next morning, he acted like none of it had happened. Made coffee. Asked what I wanted for dinner that night. Opened the fridge like we were still living inside the same future. I stood in the kitchen and said, I want you to tell me you were wrong. I want you to tell me Abigail is still my maid of honor and that you understand how disgusting what you said was. He didn't even look ashamed. He sighed. I think you need a few days to calm down. I said, I don't need a few days. I need an answer. He looked at me then, irritated, tired, superior. Fine. My answer is that we compromise. She can be a bridesmaid instead of maid of honor. She's still included, just not front and center. And that was it. That was the end. I wish I could tell you there was some final speech after that. Something sharp and unforgettable. Something cinematic enough to match the feeling in my chest. There wasn't. Daniel said, You're being unreasonable. I looked at him standing in our kitchen with a coffee mug in one hand and absolute emptiness where his remorse should have been, and I felt something inside me go very still. Not confused anymore. Not hopeful. Just still. I nodded once, picked up my purse, and went to work. The drive there felt unreal. Traffic lights changed. People crossed streets. A man in a pickup truck beside me was singing to himself with the windows down. The world was offensively normal while mine was collapsing in perfect silence. At first, I told myself I was just going to think. I parked. I sat in the car. I stared at the steering wheel. I replayed everything he had said, every word, every tone, every carefully packaged cruelty, disguised as practicality. She's going to pull focus. The photos would feel more cohesive, front and center, as if my sister were not a human being, as if she were a decorative problem in the frame. I thought about Abigail at 12 years old, skin burned and peeling, lying in a hospital bed and asking my mother if I was okay before she asked about herself. Then I thought about marrying a man who had looked at that same history and reduced it to a visual inconvenience. And suddenly the decision was not hard. It was expensive. It was painful. It was humiliating. But it was not hard. I went inside, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started making calls. The venue first. My hands were shaking so badly I had to dial the number twice. When the coordinator answered, cheerful and efficient, I nearly lost my nerve. There is something brutally final about telling strangers your wedding is over before you've even said the word breakup out loud. I forced my voice steady. Hi, this is Claire Bennett. I need to cancel my wedding reservation for June 18th. There was a pause on the other end, then a softer tone. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me pull up your file. I stared at the wall while she clicked through whatever system held the shape of the life I was dismantling. She explained the cancellation policy gently, like she had done this before for crying women and furious men and couples who never made it to the aisle. We were too close to the date. The deposit, $3,500, was non-refundable. That hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. $3,500 is not symbolic money. It is real money, rent money, savings money, future money. But even as my stomach tightened, all I could think was, better to lose money than lose the ability to respect myself. I thanked her. Then I called the caterer. Because I was still inside the 30-day window, I got a partial refund. About $1,800 back from the $4,200 I'd paid. Better than nothing. Still brutal. The DJ was kinder than I expected. He said he hadn't started the custom prep yet, so he refunded $400 out of the $600 deposit without making me beg. The photographer sounded genuinely sorry. He remembered Abigail, actually. Said she had a striking face for black and white portraits. That almost broke me. He refunded $800 out of the $2,000 deposit. The florist was the worst. Full deposit lost. $1,100 gone in a 2-minute call delivered in a bright voice with a rehearsed apology attached to it. By lunchtime, I had canceled everything I could cancel. By 5 o'clock, the wedding no longer existed except in bank statements, unopened invitation envelopes, and the memory of what I used to think my future looked like. Total loss, a little over $6,200. I sat at my desk after the last call and just stared at my phone. The office around me kept moving. Someone microwaved soup. Someone laughed in the hallway. My coworker Jenna came by to ask if I'd reviewed a project timeline, took one look at my face, and quietly said, "Not important right now," before walking away. That small mercy almost made me cry, but I didn't cry there. I waited. I drove home in silence. Daniel was on the couch when I got there, watching television like we were a couple in the middle of an ordinary disagreement. His shoes were kicked off, one arm stretched across the back cushion. The familiarity of it made something bitter rise in my throat. I didn't take my coat off. He glanced at me. Hey. I stood in the living room and said, I canceled the wedding. For 4 seconds, maybe 5, he just stared at me. Then he laughed once, like he was waiting for the punchline. You what? The venue, the caterer, the DJ, the photographer, the florist, it's all canceled. The wedding is off. He sat up so fast the remote fell to the floor. You cannot do that without talking to me. I looked at him and thought, interesting, how the only thing he recognized as unacceptable was losing control. You tried to remove my sister from my wedding because of how she'd look in photos, I said. The sister who carries burn scars because she saved my life. I don't need any more discussion. His face changed by degrees. Shock, then anger, then something hot and wounded and ugly. You are unbelievable. No, I said. I was in love with someone unbelievable. Turns out he doesn't exist. That was when the shouting started. For 2 hours, we tore the apartment apart without touching a single object. He said I was choosing Abigail over him. I said if that was how he saw it, he had already lost. He said I was throwing away 3 years over one badly worded conversation. I said people love to call something one conversation, when what they really mean is one moment where the truth slipped out. He said I was punishing him for trying to make our wedding beautiful. I said I would rather get married in a parking lot wearing jeans than stand at an altar beside a man who thought my sister's scars were an aesthetic disruption. He called me emotional. I told him yes, I was emotional. My life had just been rearranged by a man shallow enough to confuse beauty with symmetry. He said, "You're destroying our future over vanity." And that almost made me laugh because of all the lies he told that night. That one was the clearest. You are the one who did that, I said, not me. At some point he started crying. Not quiet tears, angry tears, the kind people cry when reality refuses to obey them. He paced. He dragged both hands through his hair. He said I would regret this for the rest of my life. And maybe on some level he thought that would scare me. But all I could picture was Abigail standing in a hospital room at 12 years old, wrapped in bandages, trying to smile at me through morphine haze because she didn't want me to be afraid. Compared to that, regret felt manageable. I said, "Do you know what I'd actually regret? Standing there in a white dress, looking at my sister beside me, knowing I had let a man I loved reduce her to something embarrassing. I would regret that every day. I would hear it in my head every time I looked at the photos. Every anniversary, every family dinner, every time she wore a tank top in summer. That regret would rot me alive. This hurts, but it won't rot me." That silenced him for a second. Then he said the one thing that proved I had done the right thing. "So that's it? She matters more than I do?" Not what happened. Not I was wrong. Not I'm sorry. Not I can't believe I hurt you. Just that a competition, a ranking, a wounded ego standing in the wreckage and still asking to be centered. I looked at him and saw not my fiancé, not my almost husband, not the man from holidays and road trips and lazy Sundays, just a stranger with good hair and bad character. "Yes," I said, "my sister matters more than your vanity." He stared at me like I had slapped him. Then he went cold. "Fine." That was the word he used. Fine. He packed a bag in furious silence, shoving clothes into it without folding anything. He knocked over a lamp in the bedroom and didn't pick it up. He muttered under his breath the whole time, fragments of accusation and disbelief and self-pity drifting down the hallway like smoke from a second fire. At the door, he turned to me with the bag hanging from one shoulder. "When you come to your senses," he said, "call me." I was standing in the kitchen, one hand braced against the counter because I suddenly felt bone-tired. I said, "Don't wait by the phone." Then he left. The apartment went silent in a way I had never heard before. Not peaceful. Aftershock quiet. There were still 2 glasses in the sink from the night before. His jacket was still hanging on the chair. A pair of his running shoes sat by the door like he might come back in 20 minutes and ask if I wanted takeout. I stood there for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum and the blood rush in my ears, and then I did the only thing that felt possible. I called Abigail. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, kid," she said. She still calls me that sometimes, even though I'm 30, and she knows I hate it in theory. In practice, I think some part of me needs it. I sat down on the floor with my back against the kitchen cabinets and said, "The wedding's off." Silence. Not confused silence, not startled silence. The silence of someone whose whole body has gone alert. "What happened?" she asked, and her voice had already changed. So I told her everything. Not the polite version, not the softened version. Everything. What he said at dinner. The scars. The photos. The replacement plan. The way he tried to call it practical. The demotion proposal the next morning. The phone calls. The cancellations. The fight. The bag. The door closing. I spoke in a voice that sounded strangely calm to my own ears, like if I let myself feel all of it at once, I might come apart so completely I'd never get back together. When I finished, Abigail didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, softly, "Claire, you didn't have to do that." That was it. That was the moment I cried. Not during the cancellations. Not during the fight. Not while he packed. Then, because even after everything, my sister's first instinct was guilt. I covered my face with one hand and said, "Yes, I did. That was a lot of money. You ran through a fire for me." Another silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. I knew that rhythm, the way she breathes when she's trying not to let emotion crack through her voice. I kept going because once I started, I couldn't stop. "You were 12, I said. 12, Abby. You burned for me. You spent weeks in a burn unit for me. You went through surgeries for me. And he wanted to move you out of the center of my wedding pictures because he thought people would look at you too much. What exactly was I supposed to do with that? Marry him anyway? Smile beside him? Frame those photos on a wall? No, no, I was not going to do that to you, and I was not going to do that to myself." She made a sound then, half laugh, half sob, the kind that hurts to hear because it comes from somewhere too deep to hide. Finally, she said, "Thank you." It undid me. I cried with my forehead resting on my knees, sitting on the kitchen floor of the apartment I was suddenly alone in, while my sister on the other end of the phone thanked me for giving her the most basic dignity in the world. As if I had done something extraordinary. As if not letting someone humiliate her was some grand act of courage. I said, "You never have to thank me for choosing you." And she said, with tears thick in her voice now, "I'd choose you every time too." We stayed on the phone a while longer after that, mostly quiet. A few practical things. Whether he had left, whether I was safe, whether Mom knew yet, whether she should come over. I told her not yet. I needed one night to sit in the ruins by myself and hear what was left standing. When I hung up, I stayed on the floor another 10 minutes. The kitchen light above me was too bright. My mascara had dried in stiff tracks on my face. Somewhere outside, a car alarm started and stopped. The world kept moving with its usual lack of mercy. Eventually, I got up, washed my face, and walked through the apartment, turning off lights one by one. The bedroom felt wrong, so I didn't go in. I took a blanket from the closet and lay down on the couch. The same couch where, the night before, I had stared into the dark and realized I did not know the man I was supposed to marry. Only now I knew something else too. I had made the right choice. It did not feel triumphant. It felt expensive, lonely, raw. But underneath all of that, deeper than the grief and the fear and the humiliation, there was something hard and clean and almost peaceful. I could still look my sister in the eye. And that mattered more than the dress, the flowers, the deposits, the invitations, the whole beautiful machine that had nearly rolled me straight into a life with the wrong man. I fell asleep sometime after 2 a.m. with that thought still in my chest. The wedding was gone. My fiancé was gone. My future was unrecognizable. But the one thing that had not changed, the one thing I suddenly understood with terrifying clarity, was this. Anyone who could look at Abigail's scars and see a problem was never going to be safe to love. The next morning, I woke up disoriented. For a few seconds, I didn't remember. Then I turned my head and saw the empty space where Daniel's things used to be stacked on the side table, his watch, his phone charger, the book he had been pretending to read for 3 months, and it all came back at once. It didn't hit like a wave. It hit like a quiet drop. Oh, right. That happened. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence settle into the apartment like it had always been there, just waiting for him to leave. I thought maybe it would end there. That he would stay at his parents' house, cool off, realize what he'd said, and either apologize or disappear. I underestimated him. The first call came at 7:45 a.m. on a Saturday. His mother. I stared at the phone for a full 10 seconds before answering. Part of me considered letting it go to voicemail, but I knew the type of person she was. If I didn't pick up, she would keep calling, and texting, and calling again. Better to get it over with. Hello? I need you to explain to me why you are throwing away a 3-year relationship over photographs. No greeting, no pause, just accusation, clean and sharp. I almost laughed. Good morning to you too. This is not funny, she snapped. My son is devastated. He hasn't slept. He can't eat. Do you have any idea what you've done to him? I closed my eyes for a second and leaned back against the couch. He asked me to remove my sister, the one who has burn scars from saving my life, from my wedding party because he thought she'd be distracting in photos. There was a beat of silence. Then, dismissive, quick. He didn't mean it like that. He said it exactly like that. You're being dramatic. He was talking about presentation. Every groom wants their wedding to look nice. My sister is nice, I said evenly. My sister is beautiful. My sister is the reason I am alive to even have a wedding. You're twisting this, she said, her voice tightening. He was trying to have a practical conversation, and you blew it up into something emotional. I let that sit there, because that word again, emotional, kept coming up like it was an insult. Finally, I said, if your definition of practical includes looking at a woman's burn scars and deciding she shouldn't stand next to her own sister on her wedding day, then I think we have very different definitions of practical. You're going to regret this, she said, sharp now. You don't throw away a good man over something this small. Something small. I felt something in me go cold again, the same way it had at dinner. This isn't small, I said. This is the kind of thing that tells you exactly who someone is. She exhaled loudly into the phone, frustrated, like she was dealing with a stubborn child. Well, I hope when you calm down you'll reconsider, because right now you're humiliating my son over nothing. I almost said something cruel. Something about humiliation. Something about mirrors. But I didn't. I think we're done here, I said instead, and I hung up. For about 10 minutes after that, everything was quiet. Then my phone started lighting up. Texts. Unknown numbers. Group chats I had forgotten existed. The campaign had started. Not everyone, to be fair. A couple of Daniel's friends texted me cautiously, like they were stepping into something fragile. Hey, I heard things got messy. You okay? What actually happened? He's being kind of vague. Those messages, I answered. Calmly. Factually. I told them exactly what he said. No embellishment. No dramatics. Just the truth laid out plainly. Both of them responded the same way in slightly different words. Well. That's not okay. That helped more than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me I wasn't crazy. That this wasn't some bizarre overreaction I had invented in my head. But the other messages? Different story. One of his groomsmen sent me a paragraph about how weddings are high-pressure environments and how people say things they don't mean and how I should have handled it with more emotional maturity. Another said, "You're kind of weaponizing your sister's situation here." I stared at that message for a long time. Weaponizing. As if insisting my sister stand beside me at my wedding was some manipulative tactic instead of the most obvious, natural decision in the world. I didn't respond. There is a point where arguing just turns into self-harm. Then came the lie. My mom called me that afternoon. Her voice was careful in a way that made my stomach drop immediately. "Claire, Daniel called me." "Of course he did." "And?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said this whole thing is a misunderstanding, that he never said anything about Abigail's scars, that it was just about height, about the way the wedding party would look in photos. He said you took it the wrong way." For a second, I didn't speak, because lying is one thing, but lying like that, specific, calculated, designed to rewrite reality, that was something else entirely. "Mom," I said slowly, "he told me Abigail is hotter than me and that her scars would be distracting in photos. He used the word situation to describe what she went through. He had a replacement picked out. This was not about height." There was silence on the other end. Then my mother spoke, and her voice had changed. It had dropped into something I hadn't heard since I was a teenager, and had done something stupid enough to trigger it. "If he called me," she said very evenly, "and lied to my face about something involving my daughter and the woman who saved her life, he is lucky all you did was cancel the wedding." I closed my eyes. Relief flooded through me. So suddenly it almost made me dizzy. "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's about where I landed too." "I'm going to call him back," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to." And that was that. My mother is not loud. She does not yell. But she has a way of speaking that makes people wish she would. She called him back. Later, she told me how it went. She said she explained very clearly that she knew the full truth, that attempting to lie about something like this made it worse, not better, that he should stop contacting this family. Apparently, he tried to backtrack, said there had been miscommunication, said emotions were high. My mom let him talk. Then she said, "My daughter is alive because her sister ran into a burning house and took the damage meant for her. If you can look at that and see a problem, then you are not the kind of man who belongs in this family." And then she hung up. I have never loved her more. But Daniel wasn't done. Not even close. 3 days later, I got a call from the venue coordinator. "Hi, Claire. I just wanted to double-check something with you." My stomach dropped instantly. "Okay." "Your fiancé called and said the cancellation was a mistake. He asked about reinstating the reservation for the same date." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so far past normal behavior that my brain didn't know what else to do with it. "He's my ex-fiancé," I said, "and he has absolutely no authority to make any changes to that booking. That's what I thought, she said, relief clear in her voice. I told him I couldn't do anything without the original account holder. Thank you, I said. Please don't release anything or confirm anything to him. Already noted, she said. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. After I hung up, I just sat there staring at my phone. He wasn't trying to fix things. He was trying to override them, to rewrite reality until it matched what he wanted again. Like if he pushed hard enough, the world would snap back into place around him. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Daniel. Of course. If you won't rebook the venue, I'll find another one. We're getting married whether you like it or not. I read the message twice. Then I typed, We're not. I've been very clear about this. Please stop. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. You're really going to throw away 3 years because you're too stubborn to see reason? I stared at that word. Stubborn. I typed back. I'm going to throw away 3 years because you looked at my sister's burn scars and saw a problem to solve. That's not stubborn. That's self-respect. He didn't respond. For the first time since this started, there was silence from him. 2 days later, his father called. Now, his father and I had always gotten along. Quiet man. Steady. The kind of person who speaks rarely but means it when he does. Claire, he said, I don't know all the details, and I'm not asking for them, but I do know my son, and I know he can be particular. I almost smiled at that understatement. I'm sorry for whatever he said about your sister, he continued. From what I've seen, she's a good woman. She is, I said. There was a pause. I don't think I can change your mind, he said, and I'm not calling to try. I just wanted to say, I understand. I wish I didn't, but I do. That was the most honest thing anyone from his side had said to me. Thank you, I told him. Then, just when I thought maybe, the worst of it was over, Daniel did something I still can't quite believe. He called Abigail. I found out because Abigail called me 5 minutes later. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at nothing, replaying his last message in my head, when my phone rang and her name lit up the screen again. Something in my chest tightened immediately. Hey, I said, already bracing. She didn't say hey back. Your ex just called me. There was a pause between each word, like she was placing them carefully, so she didn't throw something through a wall. I closed my eyes. Of course he did. Do you want to know what he said? She asked. I leaned my hip against the counter. Yeah. Another pause. Then, flat controlled. He told me this has gone too far, that he didn't mean anything by what he said, that you're blowing it out of proportion, and that if I really care about you, I should convince you to work things out. I let out a slow breath. Of course. Of course he would try to use her. The same woman he had wanted to move out of the center of the photos, now suddenly valuable again, useful, a tool to fix what he broke. What did you say? I asked. She huffed once, a sound halfway between disbelief and anger. I told him, she said, that he wanted me out of your wedding because of how I look, that you canceled an entire wedding to stand up for me, and now he expects me to help him get you back? I felt something warm and fierce rise in my chest. That sounds about right, I said quietly. Then her voice shifted, sharpened. I told him I'd run into another fire before I helped him with anything. I laughed. Actually laughed this time. It burst out of me, loud and sudden and almost unsteady, like something that had been trapped in my chest finally found a way out. Oh my God. He didn't like that, she added dryly. I'm shocked. He tried to say he was just being honest, that people overreact to things these days, that he was thinking about the future. Of course he was. And then I hung up on him. Good. We were both quiet for a second after that. Then she said, softer now, you okay? I thought about it, about the empty apartment, about the canceled wedding, about the fact that my life, 3 weeks ago, had a shape I could describe in detail, and now it didn't. I will be, I said, and for the first time, I actually believed it. The silence from Daniel lasted 4 days after that. No texts, no calls, no messages through other people, nothing. At first, it felt like relief, like the storm had finally passed. I should have known better. He wasn't done. He was regrouping. The next move came in the mail. Certified. I stood at my front door, holding an envelope with my name typed neatly across the front, and felt something inside me go cold again. I already knew it was from him. I just didn't know how far he was willing to go. I opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside was a letter. Not handwritten. Typed. Formatted like something official. For a split second, my stomach dropped because I thought, lawyer. Then I read the first line. It wasn't a lawyer. It was him. I had to sit down halfway through because I couldn't process the audacity standing up. The letter formally requested that I reimburse him for all wedding-related expenses he had incurred in good faith. His suit, his shoes, gifts for the groomsmen, a grooming package. And then, I actually laughed out loud when I got to this part, Emotional damages resulting from abrupt and unilateral cancellation. At the bottom, he had totaled it, $5,125, plus an additional amount to be determined for emotional suffering. He had attached a separate page, an itemized breakdown, for his feelings. I stared at it for a long time. Then I called my friend Marcus. Marcus is a paralegal, which means he has the unique combination of legal knowledge and just enough cynicism to immediately recognize nonsense when he sees it. I read him the letter. There was a long silence. Then, "This is not a legal document," he said. "This is a craft project." I leaned back in my chair. That's what I thought. "He has zero standing," Marcus continued. "You paid the shared vendor deposits. Those are your losses. His personal purchases, that's on him. And the emotional damages thing," I could hear him smiling, "that's creative." "So I can ignore it?" "You can absolutely ignore it. Keep it, though. Document everything. If he tries anything stupid, you want a record." That word again. Document. It made something in me shift. Up until now, I had been reacting. Now I started paying attention. Saving texts. Screenshotting messages. Keeping call logs. Filing the letter. Not because I thought he'd win anything, but because I was starting to understand something important. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was control. And control, when it starts slipping, gets messy. I didn't respond to the letter. I filed it away. And for a brief moment, things were quiet again. Then came the suit. Daniel had ordered a custom suit for the wedding. $1,400. Tailored, fitted, non-refundable. It was still at the shop because they held final pickup until closer to the event. I had already called them after the cancellation and told them I'd pick it up eventually. It was mine. Paid for. Simple. Until the shop called me. "Hi, Claire," the owner said. "I just wanted to confirm something. Your fiancé came by and said he needed to pick up the suit early for alterations." I closed my eyes. "He's my ex-fiancé," I said, "and he is not authorized to pick up anything." "Yeah, I figured something was off," the owner said. "We don't release garments to anyone but the purchaser. Just wanted to double check." "Thank you," I said, my voice tighter now. "Please flag the order. No one but me." "Already done." I hung up. Then, against my better judgment, I texted Daniel. "What exactly were you planning to do with my suit?" The reply came fast. "I was going to hold on to it, so you'd have to talk to me." I stared at the message. "Read it again." Felt something in me snap. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, quiet break. He wasn't even pretending anymore. Not apologizing. Not explaining. Just stating it plainly. Leverage. "I paid for that," I typed. "It's my property." "You wouldn't even talk to me," he shot back. "Because I didn't want to be manipulated." Because I had already said everything that needed to be said. Because no conversation was going to turn that dinner into something else. I didn't answer him. Instead, I called Marcus again. He listened. Then he said, "That's not leverage, that's attempted theft." That word landed heavier than I expected. Theft. Not miscommunication. Not emotional reaction. Theft. "Send him one message," Marcus said. "Keep it clean." He helped me draft it. "Any attempt to obtain, withhold, or interfere with my personal property will be documented and may result in legal action. Do not contact my vendors again." I sent it? Daniel replied almost immediately. "You sound like a robot. This isn't who you are." I looked at the message, and for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no hurt, no urge to defend myself. Just clarity. You're right, I thought. This isn't who I was. It's who I have to be now. I didn't respond. The resolution didn't come from me. It didn't come from him. It came from someone who had been watching quietly the entire time. One of his groomsmen. A woman named Rachel. She had been neutral through everything. Checked in once. Asked what happened. Didn't pick sides. Until she did. Apparently after the letter, after the suit, after everything. She sat him down. And she told him the truth. Not gently. Not carefully. Clearly. "You asked a woman to push her sister out of her own wedding because of burn scars she got saving her life," she said. "And instead of apologizing, you spent 3 weeks trying to bully her into coming back." He tried to interrupt. She didn't let him. "You called her sister and tried to manipulate her. You sent a fake legal letter. You tried to take her property. This isn't heartbreak anymore. This is harassment." And then she walked away. Stopped answering his calls. Stopped defending him. Stopped being part of his orbit. And when she told the rest of their friend group what had actually happened, not dramatically, not as gossip, just facts, something shifted. People didn't make announcements. They didn't confront him in groups. They just pulled back. Stopped responding as quickly. Stopped showing up. Stopped engaging. The kind of quiet withdrawal that hurts more than any argument ever could. He did that. Not me. Not Abigail. Him. A week later, Abigail came over. She brought a 6-pack and a frozen pizza like nothing had happened. We sat on the back porch as the sky turned from blue to gray to black, talking about nothing important. Work, traffic, a truck she was thinking about buying. Normal things. For an hour, we didn't talk about Daniel at all. And then, out of nowhere, she said, "I need to tell you something." I looked at her. Okay. She stared out at the yard, not at me. After he called me, I almost did it. My chest tightened. Did what? I almost called you, she said, and told you to reconsider. I went very still. Why? She let out a breath. Because I felt guilty, she said. Like this was my fault. Like if I didn't have these scars, or if I looked different, none of this would have happened. For a second, I couldn't speak. Because that was the part I hadn't seen coming. Not his manipulation. Not his entitlement. Hers. Her guilt. The idea that she could somehow look at what happened and find a way to blame herself. I actually picked up my phone, she said quietly. Started typing. What stopped you? She turned to look at me then, and there was something clear in her eyes. I realized if he had said that about anyone, she said, any friend, any cousin, anyone with a scar or a birthmark or anything, you would have still canceled the wedding. I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't about me, she said. It was about him, and I was about to make it about me. I swallowed. Then I said, "You are not the problem." She held my gaze. "You've never been the problem." Silence stretched between us. Soft this time. Not heavy. Not painful. Just real. "You're the reason I am sitting here," I added. "On this porch, drinking this terrible beer." She snorted. "The beer's not that bad." "It's awful." "Yeah, it's awful." We laughed. And it was the first time since everything happened that it didn't feel like something was missing. I'm not over it. 3 years doesn't disappear just because you made the right decision. There are moments, brushing my teeth, driving to work, right before I fall asleep, where I forget for half a second, then remember, and it hits like a small electric shock. Oh, right. That happened. The apartment is quieter now. His things are gone. He had his dad come pick them up while I was at work, which I appreciated more than I expected. No confrontation. No scene. Just absence. There's a space on the bathroom counter where his stuff used to be. A half-empty closet. A fading line on my ring finger. Small ghosts. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. If he apologized, if he came back and said all the right words, if he finally understood, would I take him back? No. Not because I don't believe people can change, but because what he showed me wasn't a mistake. It was a lens, a way of seeing the world. He looked at my sister's scars and saw inconvenience, and I cannot build a life with someone who sees sacrifice that way. Abigail went back to her life, her job, her routines. She doesn't dwell the way I do. She never has. When we were kids, when she was going through skin grafts and surgeries, she never complained. Not once. A nurse once told my mom she was the bravest kid they'd ever treated. 12 years old, burned, bandaged. And when my mom asked her if she was okay, she said, "At least I got us both out." That's who she is. That's who he wanted to move to the background. That's who I chose. And I would choose her again. Every time.